In Singapore, all men have to serve 2 years of national service. We're in a rather haunted part of the world. The Southeast Asian region is diverse in culture and religion, and that just means the shit that happens to us is really diverse. If you ask anyone who's been in the SAF nicely enough, they'll usually tell you about the weird shit they've seen out in the field. People disappear in the middle of the jungle and turn up hours later, confused, because a ghost decided it would be fun to hide them in an alternate dimension. They'll tell you to never bring pork to certain camps, and to run like hell if you smell jasmine. And there's an urban legend about a recruit at our basic military training center in Palau Tekong, who disappeared on a route march and turned up with his organs laid out beside him in an orderly manner. Unfortunately, I never got to go outfield myself. I have a medical condition, and the SAF assigned me a desk job. I was a clerk in an army unit, which meant long hours pushing paper to make sure our soldiers had what they needed when they were out in the field. It was a boring job most days, but it turns out that the weird shit doesn't just happen in the jungles. As clerks, we didn't have bunks, but were officially entitled to one. But our hours, which normally lasted from 7:45 in the morning to about 6:30 in the evening, meant that we got to go home every day, and that there weren't enough bunks to justify giving us one. Occasionally, though, we had to work late to deal with emergencies. Like, if there was an exercise the next day, and one of the commanders decided they needed something done urgently, we'd usually have to stay late into the night fixing the problem. Our solution was to bring some inflatable sleeping mats to the office, so that we didn't have to waste time going home late, and could actually get more sleep than we would have at home. We also kept snacks around, in case anyone got hungry. Not strictly by the book, but our sergeant major didn't care. Once, one of the other clerks in the office had to stay late. He went for dinner at the camp cookhouse, and when he returned, he found a fist-sized hole in our corkboard ceiling right above his desk. His stationery closet was covered in dust from the ceiling, and a pack of biscuits in his box had been gnawed on. I found out about this when he texted me a picture of the biscuits, and asked if I had done the gnawing. I told him it was probably a rat. He lived far enough away that he decided to risk sleeping in the office, but he decided to sleep on an office chair just to be safe. The next day, we laid glue traps for the rat in every corner. You have to understand, we weren't planning on being inhumane. Those were the only ones in the office storeroom. The rat continued about its rounds unseen for the whole day. At one point, we could hear it rustling about in the files beneath one of our desks. We kept the doors tightly shut to make sure it didn't escape and bother the rest of the building, and kept our legs off the ground whenever possible. We hadn't caught it by the end of the day, and when I came in the next morning, the clerk who discovered the rat showed me what he had found when he had arrived that morning. The rat was huge, about a foot long at least. It had gotten stuck in one of the glue traps, but according to him, it had nearly escaped by the time he had arrived. He'd had to stick a second glue trap on its back to contain it. It was in a cardboard box, fully bound in the glue, shrieking and shitting itself, and the smell was intolerable. Another clerk moved the box outside, near some big dustbins next to the toilet, for the cleaners to deal with. The smell didn't leave the office for the rest of the day, although by evening we had mostly grown accustomed to it. And that night, I had to stay late after everyone else had left because of an urgent request. I finished the job and went to take a piss before going for dinner. I passed the rat, which wasn't dead yet. In fact, it was shrieking louder than before and thrashing extremely hard. I considered putting it out of its misery, but I didn't want to have rat brains on my boots, so I left it, screeching and writhing. When I came back from the cookhouse, there was a curious silence in the corridor. I went to get my toothbrush so that I could brush my teeth and go to sleep. And when I passed by the toilet, I noticed that the rat was gone. It had been separated from the traps forcibly, with a large part of its tail and foreleg left behind. And there was a fine trail of blood droplets that led to a stairwell behind the fire door. And I froze. A snake or even a stray dog that had somehow wandered into our building through an open door would have gotten caught in the traps. And someone who wanted to get rid of the rat would simply have taken the box. But no. This was something strong enough to rip the rat from the glue without getting stuck. And yet, I realized with a chill, something smart enough to open a door. It was already dark outside. I didn't want to risk running into whatever had taken the rat, so I had no choice but to sleep in camp. I made sure to double lock the office doors before I slept that night. There were no disturbances that night. Whatever had taken the rat didn't try to get into the office, and on several occasions, I went out to the toilet, grasping a pair of sharp scissors as a makeshift weapon. I didn't see or hear anything. Still, I only managed to get 3 hours of sleep before my alarm rang at 5:45 in the morning. When the rest of the clerks arrived in the morning, I told them what had happened. The clerk who'd discovered and helped to trap the rat, let's call him Jay, went out of our office to look at the box. The blood had dried by now, and Jay followed it to the fire door. Pushing it open, he shouted, "Oi!" and beckoned us over. There were 5 of us in the office, including our sergeant, L, and we all peered through the fire door at the remains of the rat. A roughly 1 meter square patch of the landing was misted with dried blood. The rat's glue and shit-covered skin lay in a stinking, bloody heap on the ground, while its bones were scattered all over. It was as if someone had peeled and eaten a large, disgusting avocado and forgotten to throw the bits away. One of the other clerks, Kay, laughed. Unlike me, Kay hadn't started off as a clerk. Kay had washed out from the SAF's NCO training program after nearly tearing his foot off in a freak accident, and he was extremely pissed off about it. He spent every moment he wasn't required to work in the base gym, working to maintain the physique he was extremely proud of, and drove his own personal Audi to work every day. He was also one of those hyper-rational people who didn't believe in ghosts. "Hey, 91 son, you sure you didn't do that?" I scowled at him and shook my head. "Seriously, Kay, that's not funny. Whatever this is, it might come for one of us next." Our sergeant, L, thrust a broom and dustpan into Kay's hands. "You think it's funny? You clean it up. Make sure you get all the bones, and the rest of you, go get ready for first parade. I'll see you downstairs." The parade was our morning inspection by the company sergeant major, a warrant officer. We were a HQ unit, and most of the enlisted men were clerks or storemen who were unfit for combat. So, it wasn't as intense as you'd think. It mostly consisted of us falling in on our little parade square, doing a couple of stationary foot drills, handing him our attendance logs, and listening to the usual reminders to salute officers, shave our facial hair, and keep our uniforms neat before falling out. The sergeant major was friendly and would usually let us off to eat breakfast before the day began, and he'd go to the smoking corner for a cigarette. This was in a time when smoking was still allowed on SAF bases. Jay and I decided to ask him about the rat, and so we followed him on the pretext of having a smoke. Jay, hello. I didn't know you smoked, 91 son. No, NSIC, I said. Not often. NSIC is a term of address in the Army for warrant officers and senior NCOs holding sergeant major positions, and is a general term of respect for older men in Malay. So, why are you here? NSIC, last night I stayed in and saw something weird in HQ. I could see his mouth thin out. We caught a rat with glue traps, and we left it for the cleaners to take away in the morning. Something took the rat out of the glue trap, went past the fire door, and ate it in the stairwell, peeled the skin off, ate all the meat, and picked the bones clean. His expression changed, and he looked less concerned than puzzled. Oh. I've been in the army for 25 years. I've been all over Singapore, and I've never seen something like this. Must be some kind of wild animal. What? Jay and I chatted with the CSM until we'd finished our cigarettes, then left to grab a cup of coffee before returning to the office. The rest of the day went without incident. The smell had finally disappeared from the office. We each had a few tasks to do, but thankfully nobody decided they wanted something at the last minute, so it looked as if we could leave on time. Jay told Kay, Elle and the others about what our CSM had said, and we all decided to stay back that night to find out. We also decided we'd have to go to our office manager, Lieutenant F, about this. The lieutenant was a bored Polytechnic graduate who'd signed on for another 2 years at the end of his term as a conscript because he didn't have the grades to go to university and wanted a bit of money to start his own business. What that business was differed every couple of weeks. He was a decent guy, but he was already counting down the 3 or so months he had before he could leave. He spent most of his time on his smartphone researching the latest business trends or in the gym with Kay, and always left on the dot at 6:30 p.m. He didn't seem like he'd be particularly helpful, but he was the highest ranking person in the office, and we felt like we had to tell him. Ew. And that was literally all he had to say when he heard my story. Sir, you haven't seen anything like this before, have you? Nope. It's probably just an animal. Yeah, not particularly helpful. Elle took over the conversation and asked, Sir, can we all stay behind tonight to find out what this is? I won't order you not to, because I don't think there's anything, but my official advice is safety first. Also, no in-camp photography, so I don't want to see any pictures of it. I will not be staying back with you. After last parade, basically more stationary foot drills, the reading of routine orders and more reminders from the CSM, we fell out and returned to the office. Lieutenant F had already changed into his civilian attire and left. L gathered the rest of us, as well as the 3 clerks from next door and their sergeant, to brief us on the plan. L had secured a large bag of meaty leftovers from the base canteen. This was a different place from the cookhouse, and you could get much better food, but you had to pay for it. The canteen auntie had been a little reluctant to give it to him, but he was a charming guy. All the senior officers and the CSM had packed up and left, so we'd be alone. We'd place the leftovers on some paper plates we'd found in a supply closet and leave them in the corners on each of the building's 5 floors. 4 of us would simultaneously patrol the baited location in 2 pairs, at 20-minute intervals, with a pair starting from the top floor and working our way down, and a pair starting from the bottom floor and working their way up. L and G would take turns on each patrol. There were 2 stairwells. We'd sweep each floor in opposite directions, entering it through one stairwell and leaving it through another. We'd have our berets on, because the crests we used were supposed to be blessed by Singapore's 4 major religions, and thus effective at repelling spirits. This was as close to actual military shit as I'd gotten, and I'm not gonna lie, I was excited. The first patrol started at 7:30 at night, after we'd had dinner and laid the plates. L and J would start from the top, with the 2 of the clerks from the next door going from the bottom. I was left in the office, which was on the 3rd floor with G and K, the last clerk from my office, and the 2 clerks from next door. I was left in the office, which was on the 3rd floor, with G and K, the last clerk from my office, M, and the other 2 clerks from next door, O and P. K sat at his desk polishing his boots, while I made small talk with the rest. M was just an average guy. He had severe eczema and was always picking at his skin. There was an unspoken agreement among the rest of us to only let him sit in his own chair because we didn't want little skin flakes on the rest of ours. O was a senior from my junior college whom I'd seen around on the track team. Unfortunately, he was also a little deaf in his left ear, and that disqualified him from combat. He'd already secured a place to study medicine at Cambridge, and was due to leave later that year when his term of service was up. And P, meanwhile, was one of those people who were truly brilliant, but didn't do well in Singapore's pressure cooker of an education system. If he hadn't lost an eye in a motorcycle accident in his polytechnic years, he would have made a great officer. He was caring and genuinely business-minded, unlike the Lieutenant F, and planned to start his own marketing business after graduation. G, I didn't know much about. He'd been posted in a month before, and was in a slightly higher fitness category than us, like L was, but still unfit for a combat vocation. He seemed really quiet, and was fiddling with a pen he'd found on M's desk. O was telling us about a girl he'd met at a local club the Friday before, when we heard a sudden screeching sound and a bang. M, startled, ducked under his table, while P snatched his beret from his pocket and held it like a wand. G, meanwhile, turned swiftly toward the window where K's desk was, and K had put his boots down to look out his window. It was just a car. Somebody's BMW had sideswiped one of the bollards outside HQ for some reason, leaving a dent in its side. We could see the irritated driver, a well-built soldier with gray hair who looked pretty high-ranking, get out to inspect the damage and shake his head before getting back in and driving away. "Wow, that is some seriously bad driving," K quipped. G looked deep in thought. "That's an expensive car, and a senior commander. It's not raining outside. It wasn't raining earlier. There's nobody else on the road. That couldn't have been bad driving, but I'm not going to speculate on what it was." L and J and the other two clerks soon returned from their first round of patrols with a bored look on their faces. They'd swept the building once from top to bottom, and none of the meat had been taken. After a quick summary of their findings, the next patrol began. G and I started our patrol at the bottom right stairwell. Right, that is, of the building's main entrance, while K and O worked their way down from the top left stairwell. The first floor was pretty empty. It was just a bunch of locked rooms and the HQ ops room, which was sealed behind a thick metal door. There were duty staff in the ops room at all times, so it was unlikely that the thing could go in there without someone raising the alarm. We ended up just checking the plates, which were still full, and then giving each of the doorknobs a quick tug to make sure they were properly locked. This thing might have been able to open doors, but picking a lock was something else entirely. Our inspection finished, we went up the right stairwell and headed to the second floor. Halfway up the first set of stairs, G motioned me to pause. 91 son, do you hear that? I strained my ears, trying to hear what he'd heard. All I could hear was the soft drone of the building's air conditioning system and the calls of the late evening birds. There, again, he whispered, and this time I heard it. Soft, scuffling noises, headed down the stairwell. We ran to the landing for the next floor and looked up at the next flight of steps. Berets at the ready to drive off whatever came at us. A single, oily paper plate drifted down the stairwell from at least 2 floors above, bouncing off the railings and scuttling softly. Shit, G hissed. 91 son, call the office. We need 2 people in the stairwell now. Get them to check the 3rd floor plates too. While I rang our office number and spoke to L, G took out his phone and called O, who picked up immediately. We're in the stairwell right now. A plate's been taken, but no contact yet. Have you seen anything? G listened to O's report inside. Alright, if you haven't seen it, then it's probably on the opposite side from you. It's somewhere between the 3rd and 5th floors. Hold position, keep 1 man in the stairwell and 1 man looking out of it. Be careful. Stay on the line. M and P went to the stairwell. They entered from the right doorway on the 5th floor, shaking their heads. M texted me to say the plate that had been taken wasn't from the 3rd floor's right corner, and that the 2 of them hadn't seen or heard anything unusual on the 3rd or 5th floors. G updated O to say it was probably on the 4th floor in that case, and asked me to text M and P that information. And G turned to me. O says it's not come out of the stairwell on his end, so it seems to be on the 4th floor landing. We've got this thing cornered. Are you ready? I had my beret in hand, and a stupid amount of confidence. Hell yes, I whispered. Then, someone on the 4th floor bellowed, Gunnerman, who said you could smoke indoors? 3 things happened almost simultaneously. G urgently whispered through the phone, Oh, what happened? K texted me to say CSM came back, I don't know why, saw us from the lift, and thinks we're smoking in the stairwell. Confirm, sign extra. Signing extra refers to being issued extra duty as punishment. And 3, the door on the 4th floor stairwell slammed open, and there was a loud, scrambling sound as something dashed across the hallway, straight towards our company sergeant major. And Sig, behind you! G and I burst out of the stairwell just as O shouted his warning. Our company sergeant major didn't even flinch as he turned around to regard the beast that was charging at him. He took 1 step towards it, twisted around and delivered a roundhouse kick directly into its head with his heavy leather boots. The thing slammed into a wall and scrambled to get up. He casually walked over, stood on its neck with one boot, and its front limbs with the other, and roared at it. Bloody hell, fuck you, understand? He turned to us, and we knew it was our turn to get roared at. Gunnerman, come over here now. We gathered around the kicking, struggling thing our CSM had taken down with terrifying ease. It looked like it was made of rattan, with a stick-like body approximately 4 feet long, 4 spindly limbs, and a stiff tail. Its front legs ended in long, sharp fingers, while the back were 4-toed like those of a pigeon. Its head was round, with space for 2 reflective black eyes and a large, and broken, jaw full of splinter-like teeth. At this point, though, we were more afraid of our CSM than whatever this was. Gee, if anyone else is involved in this mess, get them up here now. The rest of you, empty your pockets. Every one of us hurriedly turned our pockets out as G called the office, and when the rest came, he made them empty their pockets as well. The creature hissed at the clinking of keys and coins, and our CSM pressed even harder on its neck until he heard a snap, and it went limp. He turned to either side, examining the contents of our pockets. Are you fucking stupid? You didn't know what you were chasing, and not one of you brought a fucking weapon. M piped up. And sick, we don't... M, your office doesn't have a penknife? Your office doesn't have scissors? Your office doesn't even have a hole puncher? For fuck's sake, use your brain. Our CSM kicked the thing twice to make sure it was dead, then stepped off to take a closer look. It was already starting to disintegrate, and its head and arms broke off when he removed his boots. 91 son. This is the thing you said ate the rat, right? What the fuck did you think you were looking for? I shook my head. Ghost, Ensic? That's why we only had berets. Wallow. This is a Singlish expression that indicates exasperation. The dead creature quickly disintegrated into a pile of brown dust upon its death, which we took as a sign that it wasn't of this world. The dust smelled like leaf litter and rot. Our CSM made O sweep it up, seal it in a garbage bag, and throw it into the bin. And then he brought us into his office, which he had apparently forgotten to lock, thus explaining his return to camp. Does anyone else know about your little adventure? Yes, Insig, L replied, but only Lieutenant F. We told him that we were staying back to find out what it was, and he just said to be safe. Good. At least you know how to get permission. He sat behind his desk and glared at us before his expression softened. Only slightly. Yennerman, our dear 91 son came to me this morning and told me about this thing. I was curious, so I called up some of my buddies from other units to see if they knew about it. I only got one answer from one guy who had seen something like this at his chalet in Changi a couple of weeks ago. He tried to catch it, but it ran away. Do any of you live in Changi? K, the hyper-rational Audi driver, raised his hand. Check your car now. L, go with him, and take this just in case. Our CSM handed L a heavy flashlight. L and K took the flashlight and left, while we waited in the office. The sound was coming from the ceiling. Everybody out. As we hurried to the door, he reached into his file cabinet and took out an army-issue parang, a type of machete. I wasn't too surprised that he had something like that in his office. Warrant officers tended to accumulate a lot of weird shit in their years of service. We just about closed the door when something fell through in a cloud of white corkboard dust, and RCSM swore. There was a wet thud and a loud squeal as he hacked into the thing that had burst through the ceiling. Fucking rats. L and K returned from the car park. There had been nothing suspicious in the car or on it, so I guess K hadn't inadvertently let the stick thing hitch a ride into camp. It must have lived in the dense jungle that covered part of our base, or at least somewhere on the grounds where nobody had seen it before. For putting ourselves in danger, we all had to sign 3 extras, but that was it. I didn't mind too much though. 3 weekends was a small price to pay for discovering something like this. And Lieutenant F, well, he never believed us. A few months later, I ORD'd, which is Operationally Ready Discharge, which is what happens when our 2 years of service is up. Almost everyone involved, except for M, had already ORD'd by then. After collecting my civilian ID and changing out of my uniform for the last time, I visited our CSM as part of my farewell tour. He was still in that same office, although his ceiling had been repaired by then. He shook my hand and congratulated me on finally getting through 2 years as a national serviceman. He asked if I wanted to go for a smoke, and I accepted his offer of a cigarette. We were standing outside at the smoking corner, chatting until when we'd almost finished our cigarettes. He took a quick look around to make sure nobody else was there, and motioned me to come closer. He leaned over and whispered, "Keep an eye out. Things are changing."